Welcome to the Fleet News Group podcast, where we explore the people, the ideas, and technologies shaping the future of fleet. In today's episode, we're joined by Andy Graham from Evolve Fleet, a seasoned expert with over 3 decades of experience helping organisations use technology to better manage their vehicles and assets. From the early days of spreadsheets to today's connected enterprise systems, Andy's seen it all. We'll unpack the evolution of fleet technology, the push for integration and data-driven decision-making, and what's coming next as connectivity and AI take centre stage. Andy, welcome. It's great to have you on the Fleet News Group podcast.
Right, thanks, Mark. Good to be here.
We've been friends for a long time. We worked together almost 20 years ago now. We are getting a bit old, but it's still exciting with all the technology. Tell us a little bit about, where you started and what it looked like back when, it's 20 years ago or more now?
More. I know I look that good, right? Yeah, you wouldn't think it. So I've been in tech for about 30 years now. Started up in the mid-90s, and almost all of my career has been in fleet management, and I extend that to financial services as well, right? Because we provide financial services on top of the vehicles. So I got into the fleet industry purely by chance in 1999 when I joined a business called Eden Vehicle Rentals, which is a small fleet company in the north of England, in Carlisle, where I'm from. EVR, as it was owned by Clydesdale Bank, which happened to be owned by National Australia Bank, who also happened to own Custom Fleet.
Wow.
So little did I know that purely by chance I joined probably one of the only Australian-owned business in the whole of Cumbria. So that was just purely by chance. And then not long after I joined, we rebranded to Custom Fleet. And the first Australian I ever met was a well-known name in the fleet industry, a gentleman by the name of Keith Cormican.
Yes.
So he employed me back in 1999. So that was my entree into the world of the Australian fleet industry. And then ultimately, I was offered a role in the Sydney office in 2003. For 1 year. It was a 1 year have a bit of fun in Australia and then go back. And 22 years later, I'm still here with 3 kids. Moved up the ranks in Custom Fleet and became effectively the CIO in 2004. And then when Custom Fleet was sold to GE in 2006, which is around the time you and I would have first met, thereabouts. Yeah. So myself and 5 other executives, whose names most people will be familiar with, we joined Fleet Australia in Castle Hill, and we were given a very clear brief from Robbie Blau, make it the premium provider in the industry, not the biggest, but the best. 15 years later, the business had grown to 300,000 vehicles under management and around 1,200 staff. The business became SG Fleet in 2008, and today, as we all know, SG Fleet is by far the largest player in the industry. It's daylight between them and everybody else in terms of fleet size. And then, in 2021, when I was hitting that age of 45, I kind of thought I've been doing the same thing with the same people for 22 years at that point, 23 years. I decided to move on and joined a business called Splend, who provides subscription services into the industry, the largest subscription provider in the industry, and specialise in the rideshare space. And that was really exciting. They were on the cutting edge of particularly EV, the electric vehicle evolution at the time. Spent 2 years there as the Chief Technology Officer. Again, helped to grow that business quite considerably over that period of time. They recently had a valuation of 200 million.
Wow.
So did pretty well with that one as well. And then, after that, I've been working with Evolve for a number of years, helped them build the business, the fleet division, starting in 2012 when they first approached me at SG Fleet with a solution and said, we've built this infringement management product for a small rental industry, for a small rental business.
Yeah.
Would you guys be interested? And at the time, we had about 150,000 assets, and infringement management is one of those painful processes that doesn't get better with time. And you can just throw people at it, right? Particularly back in those days when RPA and AI and so on and so forth. So I basically snapped the hand off and said, I'll take it, and you should go and sell this to every other business in Australia that manages a fleet of vehicles, because everybody's got the same problem. And that's what they did. And then I helped them develop a number of other products, which they subsequently sold to other leasing companies. built a very, very successful fleet business. And Bill, over the years, who's the owner of Evolve, had been trying to get me to come across. And then in 2023, I decided to make the leap and jump across and move to the other side of the fence and provide services back into the fleet industry, which has been quite the shift.
It's
That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, it is interesting on the other side. We're gonna go back 20 odd years now, because like when you joined Custom Fleet at that time, they were the largest fleet leasing management company in Australia.
Largest in Australia, largest in New Zealand, but about number 21 in the UK. So I had about 18,000 vehicles there, about 150 plus. I had the fleet card product as well. So that was a pretty big part of the business in Australia. But very, very different days back then. I mean, spreadsheets, right, with the default error prone, black version control, couldn't scale. Microsoft Access databases were here, there, and everywhere. And a lot of the off-system tools, which were there to plug system gaps. So actually, some of them in use today. I was working with a business recently that's working on a piece of technology that's about 20-year-old. Still works well. It does the job. Not scalable or sustainable, but it still does the job. So a lot of these were bulletproof. But yeah, processes were manual, compliance was reactive, no alerts, no triggers, no audit trails. Vehicle histories were fragmented, so they're in people's heads and then buried in emails. And this is just as email was starting to come to the fore as well. Green screen systems, which a lot of people would remember, like LeaseBase and Torque and those types of things. They were
can we pause there?
Can
we pause there just for a second for some of our younger listeners? So, like, we used to do work. We used to work before email. Like the world existed before email.
It did indeed. So so just to give you an indication of when I started, there was no email when I first started in tech. Email was very embryonic at that stage. Obviously, it existed in academia, but not in corporate at any scale. And my first job was in a bank in Carlisle to 1995, 1994. And what I would do, and again, just to give you the difference of where we are today, we had to, every day we had to reconcile the transactions from the previous day. And we did that via a magnetic tape. A magnetic tape it's about maybe a foot long, like a tape, a circular tape. We had to put that onto a deck. And that was delivered to us from London every day by a taxi. So a taxi driver had to drive up, which was about a 3.5, 4 hour drive at least, and then drive back again every single day. So I used to go down and collect the tape, we had a security guard on the door to protect, just in case someone decided to try and steal the mag tape to get the transactions off it. And then I had to transfer that all manually, because again, this was in the early stages of wide area networks as well. That's where we started. So that's how far back that was. There's no email, there's no ease of transmission of data beyond physical hardware.
Yeah, wow. So I suppose I wanted to get in about talk about the technology, because you, like, in your history there, you mentioned Custom Fleet, you mentioned SG Fleet, and then you mentioned Splend, like three of the biggest in their industries and in the thing. People would think that they've got pretty slick systems and everything's running smoothly and it's all nothing's manual because it's it's so big, but that's not the case, isn't it?
A lot of the businesses grow by there's inorganic and organic growth as well. So as you acquire a business, which obviously we did at SG Fleet several times, both invested in and acquired businesses, it comes with platforms that you then have to integrate. So it's not by choice, it's not by design. It just naturally happens. And then Custom Fleet obviously have gone through a number of ownership changes over the years as well. And with that comes different directions in systems and ownership and what the parent wants to use and how they want to use it. So it's just evolving. It's constantly evolving. Splend was a little different. It was digital. It was kind of a digitally native business in that it was started organically by Chris and all of the systems. But again, when you start a business, you do whatever is necessary to get the business off the ground. You're not thinking, I need this system to scale to 10,000 assets or whatever it would be. So part of the challenge I walked into at Splend was how do we build a sustainable, scalable technology platform using my experience at SG Fleet. Now, when I left SG Fleet, we were 300,000 vehicles. Splend was, I think, a couple of thousand, something like that. Very, very different, but the same kinds of challenges. You still had to register cars, you're going to manage infringements, and you're still going to do the servicing, and all those same principles still apply. just at a different scale. But yeah, so thus far, I'd like to say that I've seen the perfect fleet company who has perfectly digitized systems and does everything automatically. But I'd be lying if I said I do.
So what have been the big shifts? Like obviously we just talked about email and when email came, got rid of those magnetic tapes and file transfers and things like that. The internet would have been a big shift sort of in the early 2000s. Has there been sort of big technology changes? Can you
Yeah, the
maybe
the big shifts for me were back in the early 2000s, I guess, a pressure to move away from green screen systems. And I say a pressure, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment.
Mhm.
So green screen systems like Lease-Base and Torque were very common. They're not necessarily intuitive and hard to integrate with, but they were rock solid. They're rock solid and functionally excellent. And some would argue that when we move to kind of the graphical interfaces, we sacrifice depth for visual polish. It's a bit kind of like substance for style. So you lost a lot of that capability and functionality just so that you could integrate. Having said that, it's now obviously led to where we are today. And then this was in the time of the dot-com boom. So this was e-commerce was the term that people used back then. I don't think people use that term nowadays, but that's what it was called. That's what it was called back then. So technology took this huge leap forward where you could deliver services, insights, and transactions online. And we started back in 2001, we started delivering our quoting solution, which was still in Microsoft Access, but instead of sending out the updates on CD, which is what we did every fortnight, we would package up about 50 CDs and send them to all the brokers. We were able to put them online.
Yeah.
So you can now download it from online. So that again just completely shifted the workload that it's a one-to-many. So rather than preparing 50 CDs to go to 50 brokers, which took an entire day, you put one file online, sent an email to all of the brokers who go collect it. Fundamental shift, right? Like in the time it took to do it, and it took away the friction of the process. So, and fleet management, it's underpinned by technology. So all of these incremental changes had significant impacts on all of the fleet businesses and ultimately the customers as well. And then compliance and financial risk were becoming more important. So traceability, transparency. Clients demanded more, so they're saying, well, we interact with other businesses like this. We expect to interact with you in the same way. So you couldn't just provide spreadsheets anymore. You want to provide dashboards and alerts and self-service portals and real-time data. And the complexity of fleet is, I think, and this being in the industry as long as you have, everyone underestimates the complexity of fleet when it comes to it. They come in and they say, but you guys just put vehicles on the road like, no. That's straightforward, unfortunately. When you take into consideration, you've got leasing, novated, operating, rental, subscription, each different in the proliferation of products and services that's attached to each one, and then the financial elements, and then like you've got the finance management, the fuel cards, the tolling, the telematics. All of these things need to be managed, monitored in a system. And that's very complicated to the extent that I worked in banking in the late 90s, and although technology's moved on, the complexity of managing a fleet system and systems in the holistic sense was more so than managing mortgages.
Yeah, wow.
That's how much of a shift I saw when I joined the fleet industry and the complexity of what we were doing and how we had to do it.
Yeah. So talking about all those integrations, so it sounds like as we hit the 2000s, there started to be more things you needed to integrate into these new systems.
Yeah.
One of the things a lot of fleets struggle with is managing a single source of truth, like having one asset register or one database and getting all integrations to talk to each other. Are we there yet? Have we got that stuff sorted out?
Again, it just depends. It depends on who you ask and where you are. So you've got those that have inherited or purchased other businesses where they don't have a single source of truth until they integrate the systems. I mean, for me, like that's your utopia, is to have that single source of truth. Because the siloed systems lead to misalignment of data, bad decisions because you can't get that visibility. Customers aren't happy because they've got to go to one system to do this, but another system to do something else. And then the integration for me, it's more. It's not just about the technology, it's about the ownership of the end-to-end process as well. So it's that, within the actual fleet business, it's about who owns that end-to-end process rather than handing off from one team to another. You want that same team to have full visibility in that kind of single pane of glass. And then the integration fails when no one owns the outcome. right? So if not one person owns the outcome, who's accountable for the whole process end to end? And it's a tricky one because of the level of complexity. But that single source of truth, even if it's multiple disparate data sources, but the staff and the customers have a single way to visualize that data. That was always the kind of the goal at SG Fleet for myself, was how do we provide that single pane of glass so that the customers and the staff aren't going into 3 or 4 different systems to do their jobs, which no one wants to do, right? It's not particularly efficient.
So what I'm hearing is sort of mapping processes is just as important than understanding how the thing works, and the technology then can assist you, but the technology doesn't solve.
Yeah, there's a simple mantra I've always followed since my days back in the National Australia Bank. It's people, process, systems, in that order. You get the right people in the right places. You get your 2B processes clear on what you want to do and how you want to achieve it, and then you let the systems support that. It's not the other way around. The system should never dictate how you should run your business and who you should employ and how you should employ them. You start with who's the right person for the right job in the right place, and what's the process that you want to have in place as an organization, and then what are the systems that will support that and make you the most efficient fleet business possible. And I think a lot of people mistake, they're going to go and buy a system and the system will solve all of their problems. Systems don't solve problems, people do.
Wow. So in the last 5 years or so, big data's became a thing. There's lots more data, lots more touch points with 4G networks, allowing a lot to come from vehicles and go across different Wi-Fi type networks and everything like that. You can have more, you can work remotely, and vehicles can, you can get that single pane of glass in lots of different places. What impact has that had on the management of fleet? Has that made it easier, or giving you more data, or is that just another challenge you have to deal with?
We're going to need a bigger boat to talk about all of that, so I'll try and I'll try and break down the key points. I've never bought into the hype of big data. For me, it's just a bit of a distraction from solving the real problem. And if I go back to SG Fleet, where we did have a significant fleet size to manage and deliver services to our customers, we focused on making structured, relevant data accessible in real time. Forget big, small, medium, I don't care. What does big data constitute, right? Is it over X number of rows? What was important to me is not the hype and the naming conventions of these things. It was, what are the business outcomes? So our goal was not to store more. Like, it's not there. You're not saying we want to store more data. It's you want to try and surface the insights faster. You want to be able to tell your customers very quickly which vehicles are underutilized, who's light on the servicing, what contracts are about to blow out. That's what customers are interested in. They don't care about big data and how you store it and who does what and technical prowess. They just want to get service delivered to them as quickly and efficiently as possible. And that was always my focus. It's not, I don't want to, kill someone with technology jargon and try and tell them we're doing these wonderful, amazing things architecturally, because nobody cares. Say, great, how many vehicles are overdue for service? And a lot of fleet companies couldn't provide that information because they didn't have the data at the fingertips to do it. But we were building online platforms, back in when we launched Fleet Intelligence in 2007 originally, and then the revised version in 2012. That was the goal. Provide reporting and invoicing as quickly and accurately, again, most important, accurately at people's fingertips, because the 2 key things that will make any fleet business unstuck, and this goes back to when I first joined in 1999, invoicing, reporting. You get those 2 wrong, you ain't going to keep customers for too long.
And I think you and I have seen that over the last couple of decades.
Plenty of examples of where that's gone really well, and plenty of examples of where it's gone horribly wrong. And there's consequences to that. So the power is not in the volume of data, it's in the clarity and the actionability of that data. And that was always our focus. Now on to the 4G and 5G, I guess, what it allows you to do, and what I started to see more of is that kind of remote assets, contractors, field staff that can be managed in real time. Whereas historically you just couldn't get visibility over them. And that was a real shift there with interactive devices in the cab, particularly for commercial assets, and having that ability to have a tablet in the cab. That's a huge shift. No one's going to deny that's a significant change in behaviors of how people operate. And then the alerts, the maintenance triggers, the digital inspections, live, interactive, We developed a product called Inspect 365 at SG Fleet, which allowed the drivers to go and do an inspection of the asset for the pre-check. Again, you could never have done that probably 10 years ago, 15 years ago. It just wasn't possible because you didn't have the coverage of the data, you didn't have the devices to support it. But kind of that 2014, 2015, as devices became more advanced and camera technology was better, quality of the pictures was better, you could start doing all of these things. So, safety and compliance is not retrospective anymore, it's managed in the moment. So a real-time alert, you took a picture of something and you could say, this is a problem right here, right now. What do I do? And then that can be fed into multiple stakeholders. The risk and compliance officer says, don't drive, stop, we cannot drive that vehicle today. We'll find you an alternate. Versus someone who, old school would have just gone in, started driving, barreling down the highway, and suddenly there's a problem. Whereas this is kind of also it's safety, right? It's saving people's lives with this technology, and that's huge.
Yeah, that's a really good angle. I think that safety has always been an overarching thing, but when you're working on paper-based forms and stuff like that, it's very hard to make it real time and active. Yeah,
but it's also raised expectations in the industry. So when one player innovates and gets to a certain point, so in a rising tide, all boats go up. It's like when one player starts becoming innovative and delivering platforms that are leading edge, everybody in the industry has to do that. So it's great. So everyone then has to step up to the standard, which is now it's real time, it's interactive, it's using devices in the cabs. So from an industry perspective, that's also been a real positive for me, is everyone's kind of chasing that differentiation through technology.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, maybe just to wrap it up, I'm going to ask you to get your crystal ball out now. The next 5 years in technology and fleet management, what do you think is going to have the biggest impact, and are we ready for it?
Yeah, so there's a few themes, I guess, just to talk briefly about. Again, I could talk for hours about this one, each specific topic, but autonomous vehicles, I still think personally that's still a way up at scale. But be prepared, not to say that people should be prepared for that. I'm very bullish on trucking. I think that's probably the first true adoption, mass adoption, just because of the environment, the way they operate, the shortage of drivers, it's primed for change. Cars in cities, that's a whole other conversation, right? It's just not, there's so much cultural shift around that. So I guess, autonomous vehicles, trucking, yes, cars, let's way down the track, except if you're in San Francisco, which is ring fenced, and that's where everybody is. That's great. But you bring a car to Sydney autonomously and say, right, just put it on the road without any training data. And I think we'd probably see some challenges then. Culturally, legislatively, infrastructure, there's a whole raft of change management issues there. I think AI is the natural one to talk about. I don't think we've talked about AI just yet, but AI-powered optimization, improving scheduling, maintenance, safety, customer experience. I think there's huge opportunities there through interactive support, streamlined quoting. I think you could argue maybe RVs, residual values, are potential focus, but I think human insight is so critical because there's so many influencing factors in RVs. Again, I'm sure people could debate this all day long, how you can automate the setting of RVs, but I still think you need that human intervention and involvement from the experience, what the market's doing right now based on conversations, not based on what some database is saying or what the press is saying.
So the old guy in the corner's still got a job then.
I think so. I think so. But again, I'm sure people will debate that one, but that's kind of how I see it and have seen it for many years. I guess and look, fleet generally does lack innovation, right? Yes, we innovate, but it's not what's happening in Silicon Valley in certain industries. So I see what people like, what we're doing at Evolve and trying to build AI into our platforms. I look at what Eden and the team at AutoGuru, I've known Eden for many, many years, been watching his journey, and what they're doing is worth watching.
Yeah.
That is a part of this industry that's been ripe for disruption for years. Maintenance transactions that just no one likes them.
That was my first job. I don't know if I've told you, my first job in the mid-90s, I used to be the guy on the other end of the phone.
Yeah.
And,
but it hasn't changed. Mid-90s, right? 30 years ago.
We interviewed Eden on the podcast a couple of episodes ago, and I still joke, I've waited 30 years for this to happen, and it's finally happening.
Yeah, and then you've got EV adoption, which again for me is more than just about vehicle choice. It's about infrastructure planning, charging strategy, billing, energy forecasting. Someone recently reminded me that back in 2008, everyone was really optimistic. There's a company called Better Place. If you remember those
Yes.
guys, they did the battery
Yes.
swapping around. So, and at the time, I was a bit skeptical. I can't see this thing taking off for a while. And it kind of intimated that I was wrong. And I'm like, hang on, mate, that was 17 years ago. And it's still in single digits, right? Adoption,
Yeah.
and it's not getting any better at the moment. If anything, it's slowed down completely, and it's plateaued. So these shifts take longer than expected. We all have a natural bias towards optimism when it comes to future innovation, but the reality is things take time. I think things like mobility as a service, and I'm covering quite a lot here, but mobility as a service and subscription models, I've always been very bullish about those. We did an investment into Carly when I was at SG Fleet. Again, I'm a really strong believer in subscription and the place that has for seasonal and short-term requirements in organizations. So they're the big ones. Are we ready?
Okay.
I think some are ready, most are not. Legacy systems are a massive hindrance in the fleet industry in Australia, particularly. But it's also, to leadership choice as well. Are people ready? It's not just about the system; it's about the leadership and how much are they prepared to do, and how much risk are they willing to take. Which in a risk industry, people don't want to take a lot of.
Very conservative.
And as I said, it'd be remiss of me not to mention how Evolve and what we're doing. Customers will ultimately benefit from those advancements, particularly around automation and the ability to do more with less. Key message that I get from everybody right now is we need to do more with less. And so what we do with Evolve, efficiency. So with the Evolve point solutions, we take high friction processes and we automate them. So that's a real key for us at the moment. And and I guess all I'd end on is it's not the idea that wins, it's the execution.
Yeah, and fair credit to Eden and the team at Auto Guru, but I think what you're doing at Evolve there is kind of pretty similar in taking that stress and friction out of really mundane process.
100%. So, and multiple processes as well across. Hence why I was very attracted to Evolve when they first approached me in 2012 and said, we're looking at automating this. And we're like, I'll take it. And then the next one, I'll take that as well. And by the way, can you go and automate that? Because we don't really want to do it. We don't have the appetite to do it. And if you do, you can go and sell it to everybody else, which they subsequently did. And now we look after pretty much every one of the top 15 fleet companies in Australia. We've got over 1 million vehicles on the platform. And most of the fleet companies use at least 2 of our services. That's how successful the business has been in the last 15 years.
Well, Andy, we better wrap it up. As you said, we could talk about this forever. And
absolutely.
I suppose I just hope, I've known you for a long time, and I just hope maybe in another 10 or 15 years we can do this again and look back and see what's changed. And
good. Hopefully we're both retired, sitting on the beach somewhere, and don't have to talk about it ever again. Either or,
It's always a good day to talk fleet, I say.
Absolutely. All right.
Well, I'll just say thank you, Andy, for sharing that valuable perspective on the technological journey fleet management has taken and where it's heading. To the listeners, if you've enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and YouTube for more interviews from the front line of fleet innovation. Thanks for listening, and get ready for the next episode later this month.